Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is the elephant in the room. How many things are there in our lives that we just walk around pretending they're not there? Things that are egregious and persistent that we've been denying or avoiding. And what's possible if we maybe make a friend of this elephant and use it for our growth and evolution. So that should be an interesting conversation. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. Now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating this brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together, rub your palms and your fingers together. Feel the friction, feel the temperature, feel that energy moving, and allow yourselves to become present to the buzzing in your hands, the sensation in your body, to be aware of this remarkable physical form through which we get to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you here with us. Oh my gosh. I'm still sleepy. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. So we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. You know, these persistent states or of affairs of some sort or another that we just manage to ignore or deny and or forget about, which is so interesting. It's so interesting. When I guess what it has to do with is just on some level a certain complacency. And I'm wondering when acceptance becomes complacency. You know, it's like we may be saying, well, I'm just accepting the way things are. But when does that step into complacency and resignation? So if you're in a marriage that is unfulfilling and yet you're committed to being in that marriage, that's the elephant in the room. You know, how about if you're committed to being there, turning it into something that is fulfilling, looking at what does it take, you know, and it may be that it's too threatening, too painful to go into those emotions or those feelings, or to open up that possibility again. It may be scary to confront that. You know, this is also part of, I just want to, you know, do life, and I'm going to ignore all the trauma that is shaping every minute of my life. You know, it's like I just want to do life. But meantime, there's all this undercurrent that is swirling, that is determining the quality of life in every minute. That's the elephant, you know. So these elephants can be befriended. I think, and they can be a profound source of power and vitality when we find a way to address them rather than ignoring them and pretending they don't exist. And it's so interesting, you know. I in working with some clients, we focus a lot on possibility and clearing what kind of the top level of issues. You know, that's the transformation process seems to work. You don't get to dive down into the deepest stuff from the outset. It takes clearing things to get to the deepest, most persistent things. At least in my experience, what I notice is that first we work on the emergencies, and then um, we get to the deeper and deeper stuff. And it's coming to mind. I've had the privilege to be working with someone who has suffered throughout their entire lives from extreme anxiety. And we've made incredible headway, where the patterns are shifting radically. And good morning, Robin. So good to have you here with us this morning. We're talking about the elephant in the room, like these things that are persistently and consistently there that we ignore or deny or avoid, or accept with resignation. Um, so what was interesting, and I don't know that this works with the conversation of the elephant in the room, but it came to mind to speak it. So here it comes. Anyway, they noticed that they were experiencing panic attacks that they haven't experienced with this frequency for a really long time. The general anxiety and a lot of the other issues have faded away, but there are these panic attacks that they were perceiving as a bad thing, as a digression, like as something getting worse. And it was really interesting because when we looked into it a bit more deeply, what we were able to identify is that each of these moments of panic brought with them an increased facility to resolve the issue, like skill building. Like the first panic attack was, oh my gosh, I'm not going to know. I don't know how to fix this. It's going to ruin everything. And what happened was they noticed in reviewing the situation, they noticed that in fact, even in that circumstance, they were able to function. So that was a profound awareness, just to notice that even in the midst of panic, they were able to function. And the issue got resolved. They were very uncomfortable and very anxious during the process, but they noticed that the thing got resolved. The next time, what they did was automatically go and take action to resolve something. This is in the space of a week, which is really amazing. So they felt the intense anxiety and immediately went and took action to address whatever the anxiety was, whatever the concern was, and were able to relieve the panic attack. But you know, they were just seeing that they had these two panic attacks. They didn't see that the second was greatly reduced and they just went into action. And then the crowning achievement, I think, is that in our session, as we were looking at these things, they noticed that they had some concern about a couple situations. In other words, they were able, probably for the first time in years and years, to get out of themselves enough to say, I have these concerns, and rather than ruminating and being upset and building anxiety about it, they created a plan of action to address those concerns before they became a source of extreme anxiety. That was miraculous, miraculous. So that's kind of making friends with the elephant in the room, I guess. That's how this connects, because the elephant in the room that they've been getting to know is anxiety, and recognizing that the anxiety arose from concerns that they felt inadequate to address. And so here, as they were identifying these concerns, they started building the skills and the confidence to take the necessary action to address that elephant before it became a rogue elephant, before it went rogue, which is really remarkable. And then anticipating something beyond the urgency of the moment, which would throw them into survival mode, panic survival mode, and was able to move beyond that to say, oh, I see where this could be a future source of anxiety. I have some concern about it, rather than becoming enmeshed in the reactivity and the helplessness of the anxiety. They were able to say, oh, okay, I'm going to take action. I'm going to learn how to do this, this, and this, so that anxiety never becomes anxiety, so that I've addressed the concern. In other words, I'm taking the steps I need to take to alleviate those considerations, those doubts, those concerns. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. And so with another person, we've been doing wonderful work, and there's lots and lots and lots of childhood trauma, and we haven't really addressed that very much, and not directly, and that was like really an elephant in the room. But we started addressing it, and it was really interesting, because this person said, well, it's like going in for root canal, like the anxiety about it, about addressing this stuff that was just there. And so here's the thing. When we have trauma, and what we discovered, first of all, is that it doesn't have to be traumatic to address and clear trauma. It doesn't have to be. Because a lot of it is just stored energy, and her greater intelligence allowed us to be working on clearing this without it being traumatic, the experience of it. But the thing is that when we have these traumas that are unaddressed, they impact us. They impact our lives. And often in ways that we don't even imagine. And so when we put the trauma in some dark corner that we don't have to look at, it's still doing its percolating thing. And it's also taken that part of ourselves that experienced that trauma with it, and it's gone back into this dark shadow. And it ends up having us be fractured, right? So like if I'm in a marriage that is unfulfilling, and yet I'm not going to address that situation, I'm not going to put my attention on creating it as something that is life affirming, then that's sucking life in every moment, because that the context of being in that marriage percolates into every aspect of my life and other relationships too, because what do I have to shut down in order to be able to survive in that relationship, right? What do I have to shut down in order to be able to um, endure or function within that context? And yet so many of us settle, like in this situation, both people are committed to being there. So if you're committed to being there for the rest of your life, don't you want some quality to the rest of your life? Don't you want to expand the expression and possibility within the context of that relationship? And then there are other relationships where we're in it and we're not doing anything to address it, because it's too threatening. I know that it's not black and white and it's not clear all the time, and sometimes we have to make trade-offs. But we get to be conscious about these things too, and to look at our choices. This case was an interesting one because both parties are committed to being there. And so if that's the case, why not make it wonderful? There are ways to be able to make it wonderful if you're both committed to being there. And then there was another person, and this is an interesting dynamic that I think many of us face as well, and that is, having experience of ourselves where, well, in this particular case, every aspiration that they had had as a kid, every desire to kind of explore and expand was kind of squashed. We got to talk about how you train fleas. I don't know if it's really true, for the flea circus or not, but I remember in the S training, the story of how to train fleas is that you put them in a jar, put a lid on the jar. When the fleas jump, they hit the lid. And they're smart fleas, so they figure out how to jump not quite as high as the lid, so that then you can take the lid off and the fleas only jump and stay in the jar. And we are very much like trained fleas in lots and lots of ways. Hello, Elaine. Welcome. Wonderful to be with you. So when we are told that we can't do stuff, or when we are taught that we're incompetent, when we are consistently reinforced to believe that we'll never amount to anything, what happens is, after a point, that's the elephant in the room that we've accepted, right? And so when we get to wake up and identify that elephant and say, whoa, that's an elephant in the room, guess what? This one doesn't belong here. It isn't ours to hold on to. It's something that was given to us. We received it. And now when the people that were creating those limitations, putting the lid on the jar, aren't there, we've gotten really good at doing it for ourselves. So when we recognize that, then we get to put our attention and our learning and our wisdom and our energy toward lifting that lid and recognizing that we get to create a new story. However, and this is also another one of those elephants, is that however, at that point, what happens is that we as uncomfortable as that state of being might be, it's familiar. And it's who we believe ourselves to be because we've been so deeply conditioned to that belief. And so the challenge is to face that potential self, which is unknown. It's unfamiliar. Like, who will I be if this isn't who I am? And so there's a security in that knowingness, that knowledge of who we are, that makes the thought of taking off the lid absolutely terrifying. So Elaine says, enjoy the now of your choosing. That's the thing, is I agree. And that choice is not always the easiest choice. That choice can be rather complex because there are many things influencing that choice. And part of it is fear of the unknown. You know, when we're entrained to limitation and fear, then the prospect of an unlimited possibility or the prospect of an identity that doesn't align with that history can be really threatening, really frightening. Even though it may be what you want more than anything, there can be a challenge to overcome the fear of the unknown, of, you know, well, what if I try and fail? You know, when you've been taught to don't even bother trying, don't even bother trying. And then what if I try and fail? Well, at least you tried, right? And then you can try again and again if you want. So, and also that brings us into how do we contextualize failure? You know, failure is feedback. You know, failure is something that we define based on a specific outcome that's bounded, you know, some kind of parameter that we've established, and it's typically bounded in time, right? But we can have intentions that go beyond those failed attempts at something. It's like trying to create the light bulb. You know, hundreds and hundreds of light bulbs were not created or didn't work on the way to the Edison's light bulb, right? Well, does each of those attempts may have quote unquote failed, but they provided information that supported the eventual successful light bulb, right? And so the elephant in the room is the things that we hold. One way to identify some of the elephants in the room, because often there's a herd. One way that we can identify them is to look at the things we hold as complaints. Well, welcome, Kay. So wonderful to have you commenting here. I don't think I've ever seen your name here before. Welcome. Great to have you joining us. So Kay says, try and fail, learn from it, then try something different. Exactly. So, you know, honestly, I do see failing as feedback. It's not like I'm a failure. And actually, I grew up with that identity of I'm a failure. And it was because there were some very extreme expectations that I never managed to meet. You know, nothing was ever good enough. And so with nothing being good enough, I internalized it that I'm a failure. And so I've looked at this whole idea around failure a lot. And I'm very much about finding life-affirming ways to interact with the experiences of being human. And one of them is to recognize failure as feedback. You know, it's like, okay, so I tried this. This was not successful, or didn't achieve the outcome that I was looking for. So if I'm still looking to achieve that outcome, what can I do differently? You know, or maybe I get to look at that outcome, and was that truly the outcome that I want to go for? So Kay says, yep. So anyway, elephants in the room. Let's look at the things in our lives that we have as a consistent or persistent complaint, that, or something that we've gone numb to, or that we've just sort of put back into the shadows, into some kind of closet that, you know, you don't ever want to open the door to that closet. Those are the things that are the elephants. And let's look at how we can befriend them, because there's a lot of life energy tied up in those elephants. And so if we can befriend them and liberate that energy, we're going to be much more alive, much more vital. So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page at 9 a.m. Eastern, also on the Enlightened World Network YouTube channel. Hi, Dido. So glad to have you here with us this morning. And I just want to say thank you to all of you who join us for these morning talks, and those of you who participate. You make the conversation so much richer, and I'm very, very grateful to you for your engagement and for this opportunity. So until next time, I hope to see you here really soon again, and until then, lots and lots of love.